Well, eNCA reporter Erin Bates has been covering that story. She joins us now in the studio. Evening, Erin, thanks for coming through. So according to the Black Search lawyer, Jeff Butlander, Batabile Dlamini is a liar. What did Jeff Butlander base that on?
So he based that on the testimony that the minister, or then Minister of Social Development, gave under oath. This was around what role she played in these work streams, the controversial work streams that were set up to help government insource social grant payments. And what she'd said in the inquiry was that she'd only learned about the real role of these work streams over time. But then later on it came out that she had had information on the record much sooner than she'd initially said. So it's around times and around when she knew about these work streams and what they were doing. It also concerns what she knew about when social services would not be able to meet that March 2017 deadline for paying out social grants. And he said that she said under oath something which on the record is not true, and she knew was not true when she said so.
So what did her lawyers say in response to what Jeff Butlander had to say?
Well, there's a kind of deafening silence on that one. Her lawyer really argued, this is Ishmael Semenya for the minister, argued that what Judge Ngwepe, or retired Judge Ngwepe, needs to do in this matter is limit the ambit of his report, that he really needs to be mindful of what his mandate is from the Constitutional Court and not overstep his mark. Semenya is saying that the other parties in this matter, in their closing arguments, are sort of goading him into being very judgmental, acting almost as the court in terms of making a determination on what's fact, what's not, whether or not the minister lied under oath, and what his findings are on that evidence. And interestingly, the lawyer for Zane Dangor took that up later on in his response and said, no, in fact, Ngwepe really does have teeth in this matter, that he's a proxy for the Constitutional Court on the ground, and he can decide, based on her testimony, which was oral evidence in this inquiry, which he needs to take into consideration, what he thinks on the facts of the matter. So the lawyer for the minister didn't really attend to that question and almost made a concession that the minister had said she didn't know about the work streams when in fact she did, and now it's a matter of curtailing what Ngwepe can put in his report.
Speaking of Dango, Butlander believes that both him, he was of course he's the former Director General, as well as the former Sassa CEO Thokozani Magwaza, gave, to use his words, overwhelming evidence.
Yes, and what's important with Dango is to note that he was both DG and then a special advisor to the minister, and it was really in his role as special advisor to the minister that things started to disintegrate to the point where they had a falling out and he left. And his resignation letter came up quite fundamentally today in terms of what he raised on those work streams again in his letter. Counsel arguing that this showed again the minister knew there were issues with the work streams and concerns over the work streams before she says she knew. So that testimony of Dango and Magwaza important because they gave oral testimony, and that's stuff that Ngwepe can take into account in this matter. But Vuyo, I think what's also important here is to remember that Dlamini has effectively been promoted to the office of the new president, Cyril Ramaphosa, someone who said that he's going to act very decisively in terms of good governance. And questions here around procedural matters between the minister and the Social Services Agency, or the Social Security Agency, which doesn't have a board. It isn't run like an ESCOM where you have a board to oversee matters. But of course, Dlamini is also very important to the Women's League. And so there are broader political questions about where she stands in the current administration versus where she stood when she testified in the inquiry.
No doubt. Now, the inquiry has come to an end. Where to from here, and when do we expect Judge Ngwepe to make a finding?
Well, I had a very eager colleague of ours asking me today, okay, is there a verdict now? Is Dlamini licking her checkbook to maybe make a payment in this matter? We're so far from there. What happens is Ngwepe will evaluate the evidence before him. He has to apply his mind quite carefully, and then he files a report. That report then gets handed over to the Constitutional Court, and it is the court that will ultimately decide on this matter of costs and whether Dlamini must personally pay for the Constitutional Court hearing on social grants. So we're a long way off, and Ngwepe says he knows it's urgent and he'll see to it as quickly as he can, but no date as yet.
Just to remind our viewers, he basically has to decide whether the failures of Batabile Dlamini and all the officials that were involved in the debacle about 2 years ago was in good or bad faith?
Yes, so there's a question here about whether it was her information and the lack of information on these work streams, whether that lack or that omission on her part was intentional and malicious, or whether it was innocent. And it really boils down to what role she had to play in these controversial work streams, and also what information she had on that deadline of March 2017, which they missed. That's what he needs to rule on, and then he will then provide that information for the order around costs. But what's also important to notice is that in some ways this is an historic matter, because in the full lifespan of our constitutional court, there's never been a matter like this where an inquiry set up at the behest of the court has had to probe whether a minister in the national executive should personally pay for a case linked to their ministry. So whatever the decision here, it's going to be an historic issue.
Now, say she indeed is found to have lied or to have been unaccountable. What does the Black Sash and the Freedom Under Law, what do they want to happen to her? Or are they looking for a separate relief to that which the terms of reference stipulate?
A very good question. I mean, what they have said is that she lied under oath, and it's that under oath which is particularly important considering the scope of this inquiry and the context in which she made those statements. But they haven't gone so far as to say, Ngwepe, you should say that she must pay costs, which in fact he cannot do anyway. He can simply advise the Constitutional Court on what he's deduced from the inquiry. And they haven't gone so far as to say whether there should be any consequences to their assertion that she lied under oath. They've simply said, based on the evidence before the inquiry, both written and oral, she lied under oath. See to it that you put that in the report.
What you want to do.
Yeah, so the ball's in Ngwepe's court on this one.
That's where we're going to leave it. Thanks very much, Erin Bates, covering that story. A reminder, of course, that it was the ConCourt that actually ordered that probe.